dedicated her life to being a champion for those in America that have been left behind. And she has, since 2014, taken the leadership of one of the great foundations in America, the Kellogg Foundation. And this is a foundation that has leaned forward. There are some foundations in America that are somewhat passive, not the Kellogg Foundation. The Kellogg Foundation gets down on the ground where it really, really matters. And the city of New Orleans, as I have said, is just indebted because there is no way that this city, being as devastated as we were from Katrina, where we had 500,000 homes destroyed, we lost 1,800 people, everything here was gone. We could not have stood back up with the well wishes and the investment of philanthropy, and the Kellogg Foundation led that effort. But, as you know, different foundations have different missions. The Kellogg Foundation has invested over $60 million in the city of New Orleans, surrounding making sure that we put people who otherwise wouldn't get work back to work. Not as a handout, but a hand up. It's called the Network for Opportunity. But they also talked a lot about equity and racial reconciliation, which God knows we need more of in this country. They have partnered with us to build Equity New Orleans. My Deputy Mayor, Judy Reese-Morris, who runs this initiative for us, is here, because equity is, in fact, very different from equality. And in communities of color who understand this really, really well, it's about giving everybody a fair shake and really believing in the statement of where there is no justice, that's no peace, which basically means when people are not treated fairly, when they not really given their fair share, when they're really not given the opportunities, it creates alienation in the community, and then it tears us apart. And when we get hungry, Mayor McAULIFFE, when we're not able to have a job, when we feel outsourced, it's easy to start looking at somebody else who looks a little bit different from you and scapegoating them and think that that's your enemy rather than your friend. And everything the Kellogg Foundation is taking us into a different direction of making sure that we can see each other when we look at each other. And so I want to just thank the Kellogg Foundation for the great work that they've done in the city of New Orleans. And I want to thank you, Lejeune, for your partnership. Please help me welcome Ms. Lejeune Montgomery TABRON.
So good evening, everyone. I'd first like to thank Mayor LANDRIEU for inviting me here this evening and for that wonderful introduction of the Kellogg Foundation and the work that we do here in New Orleans. I want you all to know that the Kellogg Foundation has named priority places, and where we have named those places, we've committed at least a generation of partnership in these places, and New Orleans is one of our priority places. I also want to thank the mayor for his leadership for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. This convening is extremely important, and I'm really honored to present to you this evening. I also want to just talk to you a little bit about when I met the mayor, Mayor LANDRIEU. The first time I met him, he spoke of conditions in New Orleans related to African American males. He talked about too many deaths, and he talked about so many that were not participating in the workforce. In fact, he had a number, 30,800. I know the number because I learned it from him. And several years ago, he said, we are going to change this. And today I stand before you learning that the number, which was 52% at the time, is now 44%. The mayor, what I've learned about Mayor LANDRIEU is when he takes leadership and says he's going to do something, it gets done. And so earlier this week, I was given a copy of the Equity in New Orleans report. And again, it's a report that's based on an agenda of equity, violence reduction, and resilience. And again, I say it's commendable and truly is an effort that will make New Orleans an example for this country. And so, Mayor LANDRIEU, I thank you for the partnership we have in New Orleans. And as I say, money only works as good as the leadership that stewards it, and thank you for your stewardship. I also want to just acknowledge Governor Terry McAULIFFE. Again, I just met him today, and I just think you're a rock star. When I heard about the efforts to restore voting rights to nonviolent ex-felons, this is a tremendous effort. More than 156,000 former inmates regained their voting rights. And I just want, and I'm sure we all know this, that when you restore pride and privilege to a nonviolent former inmate, you're establishing their dignity. And you are decreasing recidivism. We know that. So thank you so much for your leadership. So a few weeks ago, I saw the movie Detroit. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. Anyone? So this movie depicts the horrific police brutality and racism surrounding the Algiers motel incident during the 1967 riots in Detroit. And those of you who haven't seen the movie, the film is about 3 black teenagers who were beaten and killed by police, and yet all of the police were set free. And I don't think that's a spoiler alert, because I'm sure many of us have heard that storyline before. As I watched this film, I was actually stunned. It moved me in ways I had not anticipated, and I became increasingly distraught. And it was clear that the only thing out of place for me was that this was 50 years ago. As the story unfolded, I reflected on the main elements. Again, black teenagers killed by police officers, all acquitted. And if I didn't know better, I would have thought that this was a paper headline from maybe yesterday, today, and unfortunately, maybe even tomorrow. Unless we, in this room, take the necessary leadership to change this narrative for our country. We at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation believe that it all begins with the truth. The producers of the movie Detroit decided that now was the time for them to share the ugly truth. So we now have an opportunity to learn and turn a corner in my city after 50 years of an undercurrent that has pulled the energy and the spirit from people who are trying to get ahead and taking them further and further beneath their potential. In my 54 years living in the city of Detroit, I had never heard this story. But I believe now we're in a moment where if we don't acknowledge the past and the truths of the past, that we will be destined to repeat these horrific incidences over and over again. In cities across the country, I believe we are trapped in a vicious cycle. And unless we all adopt the courage and bravery that Mayor LANDRIEU has displayed in rebuilding the city of New Orleans with an eye towards achieving equity in all communities, we will unfortunately leave a nation to the next generation filled with the same hatred, bigotry, and structural inequities that we have now. So tonight, I would like to talk to all of you about a future framed in equity that we can all create together. At the Kellogg Foundation, we believe that change begins at the local level, in communities, and that once the transformational change happens from community to community, that we can then inspire the nation to embrace truth and equity and to provide more opportunities for all of our children and families. Before coming here, I had the opportunity to review your plan, Leadership for America, the Mayor's Agenda for the Future. What I see is that you've committed to assuring that safety and security of communities exists for all. You say that you can fix the crumbling infrastructure and that you can expand the workforce. And you say that you're going to create equitable communities that will eventually revitalize the nation. I say I support you completely on that agenda, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation supports you as well. In partnership, we can build a brighter future for our children. We must continue to remember what President John F. Kennedy once said: "We will neglect our cities to our peril. For neglecting them, we neglect our nation." So today, many partnerships and collaborations are taking shape around the country to get to the root causes of many of the issues ailing our cities. And it's resulted in resilience and committed people working to create change all across this nation. Because what we've learned is that we all want our cities to work. We want our neighborhoods to thrive. And we want our residents to believe in their dreams, and especially in what their children can become. However, before this happens, we believe healing must take place. The Kellogg Foundation this year launched a framework called the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Enterprise. We call it the TRHT. I believe the TRHT can help drive our cities and communities forward, and it will support the comprehensive equity agendas that you all have created. The purpose of the TRHT is to improve our ability as communities and as a country to see ourselves in each other so that we can share more equitable futures for our children and provide opportunities for them to thrive. This is the essential work before us. And I believe that this work will bridge the divides in our country. Now more than ever, we must act big and small in many ways to help people heal from the effects of racism. After a year of planning and partnering with over 150 organizations, this spring the Kellogg Foundation announced 10 grants, nearly $24 million over the next 5 years to support diverse, multi-sector coalitions in 14 places across the country. Thank you. These places are implementing the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Framework. And these coalitions have chosen which of the 5 TRHT principles are most damaging in their communities and should be addressed. I'd like to share with you the 5 principles of the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Framework. The first is narrative change. Narrative change is the creating of a more complete and accurate narrative that will help project diverse and positive images of ourselves and each other in our full humanity through all cultural settings and media and entertainment channels, while helping communities understand how false narratives contributed to the embedded racial hierarchy in our society. For example, Civil War monuments that honor those who perpetuated slavery. These stone figures continue to be a brutal slap in the face to people of color. What narrative change can do is bring a story that embraces all of our humanity. And those who understand the importance of this are the leaders that we applaud and congratulate. We know who those people are. The second principle is one of racial healing. Racial healing is about relationship building and is focusing on ways for all of us to heal from the wounds of the past and build mutually respectful relationships across racial and ethnic lines. Relationships that honor and value one's personal humanity. The third principle is separation, addressing the issues of segregation and how concentrated poverty in neighborhoods will hurt the future of our communities. What we like to see is communities coming together to dismantle and transform the mix of laws, policies, structures, and habits that created and sustained the separation of people by racial categories and the subjugation of cultures and values and languages. And there's no other place like New Orleans to see the beauty of what humanity looks like when they come together and create an inclusive culture. The next area is the law. The reviewing of discriminatory civil, criminal, and public policies and building support to implement alternatives that will produce more just application of rules, regulations, and the justice system. And finally, number 5, we've been speaking about it all day, the economy. Examining the barriers to economic opportunity and developing solutions that will create a more equitable society. As I said, this work is critical. And as you have said, this is your work. And if you are to lead the transformation in America, we believe that we can partner and help propel these efforts across this country so that we can ensure that the children of the next generation thrive. I mentioned our partnership with Mayor LANDRIEU. We have partnerships with mayors all over the nation. And I'd like to acknowledge some of you that may be here tonight. Mayor Richard Berry in Albuquerque, Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, Mayor Mike Rawlings of Dallas, Mayor Karen Weaver of Flint. Many of them and others have come to us and indicated that there is alignment with their goals and ours. And we will work together in this quest to bring equity in our communities. I mentioned the 10 grants that we made. I'd like to mention where those grants landed in this nation. In Alaska, in Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana, in Buffalo, New York, in Los Angeles, California, in Richmond, Virginia, in Selma, Alabama, St. Paul, Minnesota, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, and Lansing, Michigan. We are supporting these communities to lead the way in implementing the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Enterprise. The initiatives that these communities are undertaking will create the pathways for healing and put the stop to structural racism. And I'd like to say that they're not only supported by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, but other local, regional, and national funders are also stepping up and joining the effort. And we believe that this multi-funded partnership will sustain this comprehensive effort, community by community. The people in these communities have come together to start the transformational progress, and they are as diverse as one would expect. Philanthropies, elected officials, faith communities, business owners, healing practitioners, grassroots activists, youth, media, all are engaged and at the table for these efforts. And I'd like to just share with you some examples because each community was able to create their own agenda. The Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo wrote in its proposal that the fundamental purpose of their effort was engagement, and it was to advance a shared agenda that eliminates institutional racism. These were their words. They asserted that this would be achieved through a data-driven, systemic change that would result in transforming their community with a focus on civic faith, government, education, and business. The Chicago Cook County team wrote that racial hierarchy is deeply embedded in their region and that the key quality of life indicators fall along racial lines. But they are confident that their communities can transform. And they said they would build the foundation of people, research, power, healing capacity, and voices, creating the vision for the TRHT to flourish. And finally, the Dallas team actually adopted a pledge. And they wrote a pledge that they said honors and respects the values of the TRHT. And their commitment was as follows: exploring our personal narrative about others, challenging their perceptions about race, race relations, and racial equity, exploring their personal role in perpetuating racial division, elevating their views of all individuals, recognizing that all people are of equal value and worth, acknowledging individual collective pain, promoting the establishment of equitable policies and moving forward on the path to justice. For decades, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and other philanthropic organizations have been making a difference through partnerships. And the TRHT is another example of how partnerships can show up in community. We want this effort to fuel and spread across the entire nation. And we also know that money alone won't make this happen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to overlook the circumstances of economic injustice which makes philanthropy necessary." So we're not naive, but we do believe that if we don't address the root causes of racism, that we will endlessly treat only the symptoms of the biases and injustices in America. What you all have committed to as mayors is formidable, and we honor and encourage you, because together we believe that a groundswell of work across this nation can truly change at the national level. So I want to end by just saying, when I think about the movie Detroit, what I realized is that I too have healing to do. 50 years later, it still hurt for me. And it was painful. But what I know is that we all must heal, and when we heal, we grow. So I'm asking you today for a partnership where we can heal and grow America together, community by community. Thank you.
Thank you for an inspiring life and an inspiring message, your generosity and the encouragement and the inspiration that we got from that. I'm Mike Allen from Axios, A-X-I-O-S. We started in January, 2 days before the Trump administration. Pretty good time to start a website. And we're now up to 82 people. We cover business, tech, media, and politics. And we're honored to be partnering with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We're about to have a great panel about the future of cities. Before we do that, I want to thank the staff of the U.S. Conference of Mayors for this amazing event, in this amazing setting, right? And Mayor LANDRIEU for his heroics this weekend. He gave press conferences this morning at 3 a.m., 6 a.m., 9 a.m., 2 p.m., and he's about to go do another one. So I'd now like to welcome up our next panel. We're going to be talking about the future of cities. So we're going to welcome up Peter Scheer and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, the best-known economist in the world, Jim Anderson, and someone that a few people around here might know, Mark MORIAL. Welcome to the stage. Welcome Peter Scheer, who is chairman of the Washington, D.C. region of JPMorgan Chase and Company. He's the firm's senior executive in the region, and he's the global head of corporate responsibility. Mayor MORIAL.
Hey, Mark.
who is president and CEO of the National Urban League, the world's and also the nation's largest civil rights organization, and you are formerly Mr. President of
U.S. Conference of Mayors.
Boom.
Yeah, look,
The
the Conference of Mayors.
Dr. Jeff Sachs, the world's expert on sustainable development, and you are the director of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And we're also honored to have with us Jim Anderson, who's the head of Government Innovative Programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies. We are going to start with a jump ball. This is about the future of cities. Blow my mind. Tell me the coolest thing you know that's happening in a U.S. city. Anybody can buzz in. Jim, go.
Great Falls, Montana is currently using some of the most interesting...
And a little problem with the mic, so just hold it.
Me.
Yeah, thank
Hi,
you.
everybody. Great Falls, Montana is currently engaging their entire community in an innovation process to identify a great challenge that the mayor can identify for academia, businesses, and his entire community to solve together. It is I'm a Montana native. These tools and techniques don't make their way to Montana easily, and it's incredibly exciting to see them happening in Great Falls.
And Dr. Sachs, in just a second, I'm going to ask you something happening in an international city. But first, Peter Scheer, you're involved in cities around the country. You spend a lot of time on the ground. Tell us something cool and surprising about a future-oriented city.
So I have to say Detroit, because Lejeune just spoke, and I'll tell you one of the great innovations we've been very active in Detroit with Kellogg. I think Rip Rapson is here from Kresge. And one of the big challenges we found in Detroit was the inability of minority small business owners and entrepreneurs to get access to capital. And so the mayor got a bunch of us together and said, how do we solve this problem? And we got together with Kellogg, and we developed something called the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund 2 years ago, raised $6 million, have not had one default in 2 years, and we're now working with Lejeune and others to expand it. And what it shows you is there are so many people who, if they're given the opportunity and given the chance to start a business and expand a business, particularly in the neighborhoods which are being left out, you can really make magic happen, and it's been a great success.
Dr. Sachs, you travel the world. What's something interesting that United States cities can learn from our overseas counterparts?
I think we have to acknowledge that our cities are like our country, which is that we are divided, growing in inequality, and in a very paradoxical state, in the sense that we are in a technological revolution, and many people are living better than ever, and many people are suffering more than ever. And that's really the problem that we need to grapple with, and I'm sure that every mayor here grapples with that every day. If you go to great cities abroad that are facing similar challenges, you do not find in Germany or in Sweden or in Canada or in many other high-income countries anything like the inequality, the unfairness, the paradox of poverty in the midst of wealth that we find in this country. So I think that this is really what we need to talk about as the most important issue, because there's no shortage of great stories and great things to do, but there's no shortage of horror stories either. And I track the international situation for a living as senior advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I can tell you, objectively, we are falling farther and farther behind. No matter what our rhetoric and our glad-handing and our sense of America great again or number one or whatever we think. And I brought a little bit of data, and I'll leave some on the table for you, just to tell you very quickly. There are 33 high-income countries. We are 30th most unequal In other words, we're 3 from the top. The only high-income countries more unequal than the United States are Israel, Mexico, and Chile. And every other one has much greater equality of opportunity, of social mobility, and of income distribution. Of the 33 countries, we are 32nd, or in other words, second from worst on the poverty rate. The way that this is measured is the proportion of households less than half of the median income. We're 32nd out of 33 countries. On life expectancy, we are 26th. And on carbon emissions, we're 32nd out of 33 countries. That's the most emissions. 32nd, and the 33rd is Luxembourg, a tiny city-state. And so I just want to raise this because it's good to tell positive stories, but it's not right to understand our situation right now. And our situation is not desperate in the sense that we don't have what to do, how to do. You all have excellent universities. God forbid the President of the United States should once call someone who knows something. Not just a lobbyist, but actually someone who really knows something, who studies for a living, who analyzes for a living. God forbid that somebody from a university or an expert department should do something. And I'll just stop by making one point that everyone really needs to understand. We're richer than ever in this country. We just topped $19 trillion in GDP. We're at $60,000 per capita. And you want to know where that goes? Come visit the billionaires around the corner from my neighborhood in Manhattan. They're richer than ever. The city's booming if you go to one part of the city, and we've got poverty and shelled out streets in other parts of the city. And that's the microcosm of our country. And it's becoming less and less fair, and the workers cannot make it on their own. They can't bridge this gap. And so you have a tremendous reality that you face every single day, but it's not the lack of what we could do. It's the lack of doing it. That's why we're at the bottom of the list now, because the other countries are doing it. We just stopped doing it because the rich and the powerful are awfully rich and awfully comfortable. And that really is our problem. So I just want to make sure we keep a reality check on the conversation, not just happy stories.
SACS for president. Where have you been? I need you to come to the Urban League meeting next year.
I'm there anytime.
So the question was the coolest
And
thing.
Mayor really just,
The question was to say something cool. So what I heard from Lejeune is something cool. I think her presentation tonight, which is all about dealing with the structural antecedents of what Dr. Sachs just shared. And those structural antecedents, structural racism in the economic, the criminal justice, in our systems, is the issue that we have to confront. I'm going to amen him because looking recently in preparation for an interview, I looked and saw that the GDP of the United States was now in excess of 19 trillion. But I wanted to go look at the GDP of Russia. The GDP of Russia is 1.5 trillion. The GDP of Russia is equivalent to the spending power of African Americans in the United States. Russia is no world economic power. And the phenomenon, again, going back to what Lejeune, her initiative, seeks to really address is we have a new phenomenon in America. And that phenomenon is people who work who are living in poverty. People who work, who are paying 50% of their paychecks for rent. People who work an honest job or two honest jobs that can't pay their utility bills, can't afford food, can't pay for their children, can't afford to send their children to the colleges and universities. So this initiative, and I would challenge my friends, the mayors, because it is at the local level and it is at the level of city governments where I can tell you the best executive talent in America resides. Your job is tougher than any job perhaps in being at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because you have to deal with limits on resources, the media on you every day, the necessity to deal with conflicting constituencies and the like. So I agree with Dr. Sachs. I think we could talk about best practices. We could talk about really sexy, great projects. This museum, this now World War II museum, which started as the D-Day Museum when I was mayor almost 20 years ago, is a great and sexy project that's had an economic impact on this community in a substantial way. But we have got, in these times, to confront the underlying issues that are tearing the fabric of this nation apart, that are causing us to be discompetitive, and that really, really are going to affect the progeny of our children.
Jim Anderson, a topic that will hit home in this room. When Bloomberg Philanthropies is looking for places to invest, one of the factors that you look at is strong local political leadership. Tell me a little bit about what you look for and why that's important.
I actually want to pick up on the point the mayor just made. So, you know, our entire strategy is around strengthening cities by investing in city halls. And our focus is threefold. We invest in city leaders, in the mayors, in the key people around the mayors that are responsible on a daily basis for making the machines run on time. We invest in data and evidence and promote, equip people in city halls with the skills and work to change the culture around data-driven decision-making with funding and policy. And we help cities generate new solutions to those pressing urban challenges that keep on coming back. And we help the best of those ideas spread. One of the big new initiatives that we launched this year, in fact, a number of the mayors here in the room joined us in New York a couple weeks ago, is we kicked off with the Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School what I think is the world's first world-class leadership development program for city executives. And this came out of, you know, all the conversations I'd been having with mayors around the globe for many, many years. You know, you come into office, all of a sudden, you know, you can set that vision, you've worked the stump, you've won your election, but all of a sudden you also have to make the machinery of government align with those objectives. And those are management responsibilities as well. And so we brought 40 mayors together. We spent a couple days talking with those mayors, with business school professors, Kennedy School professors, about best practices, about your own leadership and how you bring your values to the table to get the big things that you want to have done. And in 2 weeks, we're bringing all of their senior staff for a similar program. And I think that's also critically important. Oftentimes the mayors come to events like these. We all know that the senior staff are the ones that really are lifting the heavy weight day in and day out, and I'm really thrilled that this program is making a big investment in them as well.
Great.
So I just want to pick this up because I think Jeffrey's point and Mayor MORIAL's point is exactly right, and I think it feeds into something that Jim was talking about. I do think we're at an inflection point in society right now, and I think the American people recognize it. I mean, President Trump's election was not simply because Hillary Clinton ran a bad campaign. It was because the American people are saying, this is not working. And our faith in the ability of a central government in Washington to solve the problems that we face in this community, we're giving up on it. The fact that we elect a guy who, you know, was essentially a reality television, host. And this is very similar, Jeff, you talked about the global. I mean, this is, you know, in the UK gave up on Brussels. Right. And I think the inflection point we're at is what Mayor LANDRIEU was talking about, Governor McAULIFFE was talking about. Washington cannot fix these problems. And I think we need a sea change in how we think about the institutions that are going to solve these problems, that are going to deal with inequality, because it's not going to, the conversations about how we deal with people who are don't have the money to support their families, don't have the jobs, don't have the education, those conversations are going to go on in cities and communities. They're not going to happen in Washington. And I think this is where we have to start shifting the conversations, how to get the resources and frankly, how to get the authority to mayors and local officials working with the philanthropic community and the business community and the nonprofit community and civic society to actually take on these challenges.
You know, I was going to add something because I couldn't agree with you more. I believe that the mayors, unique amongst the political leadership of the nation, have to be a counterbalance to the idea that because we're mad with Washington, we'll buy into a divide and conquer mentality, a divide and conquer narrative and framing. In other words, if we don't have jobs, it's because we have too many immigrants. If not enough people are going to colleges and universities, it's because of affirmative action. All we need do is point fingers, and that narrative, which has gained some traction in the so-called Trump political base, is something that mayors, I believe, have to guard against and represent a counterbalance to. Because what's happening in American politics as the nation becomes more diverse, the nation is becoming exactly what cities have been for decades. There's not a mayor in this room that can elect his or herself without some coalition of some sort, with rich and poor, black, white, Hispanic, and Asian, straight and gay. You got to put it all together. It's a unique way of not only getting elected and governing, and I really encourage mayors to lift up the idea that you can solve problems through coalition building, through finding shared values, even if people differ in some ideology, may come from different perspectives on things. That's the counterbalance that local government can provide in this time when a resort to division is an easy response to the difficult problems that we face as a nation.
There's no doubt that you mayors can and are doing a tremendous amount, and there's no doubt also that we actually need Washington as well, because many of the problems are beyond what can happen at the scale of cities. Let me mention a few very easy and specific issues, actually. Easy in the sense of being able to identify the problem and the solution, not to get there quite yet. Healthcare, which every one of you grapples with and every one of us is aware of, and we watch the almost parody of this horrific attempt to pass a cruel piece of legislation last month. What do we really know about healthcare in this country? That it is about $1 trillion a year too expensive for what's delivered compared to any other country. So it's a racket. This is a racket of highly monopolized healthcare delivery. It's a racket of the drug companies. Why is it that these most straightforward issues are not taken up by either party, by the way? Both have given a free pass to the drug companies. That's because of the lobbying going on. Mayors, you can't solve that problem by yourselves, but we pay the most in the world, and as you know, some of the medicines that you need, like Hep C, to stop the hepatitis C epidemic, which rages across urban America, you know it's marked up 1,000 times its production price. Gilead, in my view, is just evil because they charge $84,000 for what costs them $84 to produce. Did you hear that? $84,000 for what costs them $84 to produce. And what do they do with the $15 billion of profits that they make on Harvoni? Every year, they don't pay any taxes because you know where their intellectual property is held for a drug that was developed in Emory University? It's held in Ireland. Fancy that. So that's why we make $19 trillion in this country and people are dying of an epidemic that could be stopped immediately. And so we've got to be real at each level of solution. The healthcare costs, we've had a bizarre debate. It's not whether people should die according to the Republicans or people should be covered according to the Democrats. It's how the hell did we get the world's most expensive healthcare system beyond control? That's because of the lobbyists. It's the #1 lobby in Washington. What about the infrastructure you need to build? We're never going to get Trump's $1 trillion, I can tell you, because it takes more than 10 minutes to plan what to do. So you actually have to think about infrastructure. We don't think. But if we did think, one thing you should know for sure, I know every one of you knows it, we have to be in a low-carbon economy and you have to be resilient, and it's no joke. And nobody believes the opposite. Trump doesn't have any ideas about this, but Mr. Pruitt, he's just been a hack for the oil industry for 40 years. That's his job. But for all of us and all of you who face rainfall, this precipitation, flooding, rising sea levels, heat waves, out of control, and as this week's report that was featured in the newspaper showed you, we're aiming for a level of CO2 that we haven't seen on this planet for more than 10 million years. Try that one.
All right.
So my point is, we got to think, but there are things that you can plan. What you got to do is filter out the garbage of the lobbyists, because that's all that we live under in Washington right now, and plan for your futures. Low carbon economy, electric vehicles, resiliency to climate change, getting drug prices under control. Don't let these monopoly healthcare providers, your nonprofit healthcare providers, look at what the CEO earns. $5 million a year, $10 million a year for a not-for-profit? That's the racket that we have. So I just want to make the point that all of these problems are rather straightforward to solve. We're in the grips of greed. We're in the grips of lobbying. We're not, by the way, nothing's wrong with the American people. They agree with all the solutions across parties. This has nothing to do with public opinion. Look at how the health care bill of the Republicans, nobody supported it. Nobody supported it. Not even 50 Republican senators. Nobody supported it, not one of their constituents. It was a pure game of the Koch brothers. Pure. So nothing's wrong with this country. You've got great universities, great technology, high income levels. The technologies of the future are quite clear what to do. The abuses are quite clear what to do. But we have to strip away the games and get to the solutions. And that basically means turning off the high-cost lobbying and the Koch brothers and the others who have bent our politics out of shape, because as Governor McAULIFFE said, and he said it very clearly, that everybody knows, but they're threatened that they're going to be primaried. It's just big money that is a threat to the politicians. That's ugly, but that's what's holding us back. It's the only thing.
Jim Anderson, you were talking about the very admirable approach the Bloomberg Philanthropies takes to looking at City Hall as an organism, as an ecosystem, the people who actually do the work. When you look at a City Hall, when you go into a City Hall, what are the hallmarks of a successful one? What do you look at in the culture, the machinery that tells you we either have a problem or you have a real opportunity?
Right. I so totally agree with the last comment about the big money and the lobbyists, but I think it's also fair to say that we have some real serious capacity challenges in a lot of our city halls, and we need to invest in our city halls. and increase their capacity to solve problems more effectively. What do I think that looks like? I think that we now have, I think, 180 US cities that we're currently giving grants to or providing technical assistance to. We track a number of core capacities across those 180 cities. We look at the capacity to engage citizens. This is something that mayors everywhere are looking to do more and better. Work with citizens to define priorities, look with citizens to create new solutions, engaging citizens more fully in decision making as a way to bring people together and increase trust. Overwhelmingly, cities have bright spots here and there, but no one really is doing that at a systemic organizational level. When we look at data, the capacity to set targets, to measure things, to have ongoing conversations about that data, and to make management decisions based on what you're seeing. 70% of the mayors that we looked at said that they they used data to make decisions around policy and funding, but only 30% of them were able to give us a concrete example of actually doing it. Partnership. I think we're all here talking a lot about partnership. How do you actually invest in your capacity to partner? Some cities have gotten incredibly good at this. I always admire what Mayor LANDRIEU has done here in New Orleans, his ability to sustain long-term partnerships with a number of entities, many of which aren't based here, over a long period of time and keep them coming back for more. That took investment. That took professionalization of his core team. Most cities, that's not where we are. The final piece, the final capacity that we look a lot at is what is your capacity to test new solutions, to learn and to adapt. This again is, the prototyping concept is probably taking hold in many of your IT departments. This is actually something that, can be broadly applied across all program and policy areas to reduce risk and help you bring, develop new solutions that are right sized. So those are 4 core capacities. Very few cities are good at all of them. And so I think there's a lot of room for growth and a real need for foundations like our own and others to invest, because this is another area, there are no federal investments in human capital and capacity in city halls. Cities are left totally to their own to train their own employees on this stuff.
Peter Scheer, taking the same topic, as you travel to cities around the country, here using the JPMorgan Chase Smarter, Faster approach to it. If I'm a mayor, what in my culture, what in my organization, what in my leadership style is going to suggest success, makes you want to partner with me?
Well, I mean, first of all, do you know what you don't know? I mean, are you surrounding yourself with people who, no leader is going to have the capacity to handle every problem, and are you surrounding yourself with people, whether inside City Hall or external partners, who you're talking to, you're collaborating with? And the fact is there are incredible models. I mean, Greg Fisher in Louisville, we've done a tremendous amount of work with. Mike Rawlings in Dallas, Mitch Landrieu, Mike Duggan in Detroit, who, this is a city, Lejeune and I were talking about before, that was ungovernable for 2 decades, and this guy comes in, and there's no partisan rhetoric, there's no finger pointing, he's just fixing problems, turning to people who can help, and he got 69% of the vote on Tuesday in the first round of the primary. This tells you what people want, what Americans want, is just fix these problems. They don't want to hear about Russia, they don't want to hear fighting about legislative proposals. Fix the problems, create the jobs, deal with the education system, help me get adequate health care for my kids, help me start a small business, and remove those obstacles. And the mayors who are willing to engage in those conversations and partner across the board, and frankly, that's where the investment is going.
Mayor MORIAL, taking a point that Dr. SACHS made earlier about the paradox in our cities between the people who live very well and the people who are very poor. As you talk to your counterparts around the country, what are some creative or successful ways that cities have narrowed that gap? If I'm a mayor, what's something I can do to address that paradox in my city?
So I think the key to doing that is, first, you have to address the issue of housing, because one of the issues in cities is the affordability of housing. Many cities are stretched in that there's not a sufficient supply of quality, affordable rental housing. and understanding. And Peter said this, you've got to know what you don't know. And so does the mayor understand the makeup, if you will, of the housing stock in their own community, rental versus ownership, quality versus substandard? Because you can't move forward. This is where data comes in. You can't move forward unless you understand where you are. And for example, you forecast. How many new units do we need, given the proposed population growth, given the number of substandard housing units over the next 10, 15, or 20 years? And it's from there that you can build. So dealing with housing, I find that issue, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the book Evicted, which chronicles this issue in a very dramatic way, but I think that is an issue because mayors have the power and cities have the power of zoning. Cities have the power of a basket of incentives, whether it's tax abatements or cash subsidies. Cities have tremendous influence over this. The rub against it is NIMBY. The rub against it is sometimes not in my backyard, but I think that's a very important, pressing issue because the problem of affordable housing is far more acute today than it was 20 years ago. Why? Because, this is a data point, guys, before the recession, we were producing approximately 1 million new housing units a year. Now we're producing as a country about 600 to 650,000. This is a supply and demand issue. So if you don't create the supply, the population grows, it becomes a what? Seller's market. So it bids up the rents, it creates no options for poor and working people. So that's number one. The second thing, very quickly, is around quality, high-paying jobs. And the important for every city is to have a strategy and the plan because cities have to play to their strengths. You can't dream about what may not be within your reach. You can vision about it, but we have a challenge in the country in preparing the workforce for the jobs that are being created for tomorrow. And so every mayor, whether you control the public education system or not, needs to, if you will, partner with the workforce development, the job training providers, the community colleges, the technical agencies, the agencies like the Urban League, to make sure you're doing everything possible, not to train people for non-existent jobs, but to train them for the jobs that your economy is and will produce.
Jim Anderson, we have 5 minutes. So, Peter, you want to get in real quick?
And I wanted to tee up something because I think one of the things now that we didn't have 5 years ago, and I think in large part the Bloomberg Foundation gets a lot of credit for this, is the ability to use data like we've never been able to do it before. And we're feeding into that, through a new institute we created using our credit card and debit card data to understand where is the economic activity, so city planners have a better purview to make decisions. And I think you guys have absolutely been in the forefront of this. And this is when you want to know who are the mayors who are making the right decisions, it really is going to be who's relying on the data.
So that's super interesting, Jim. You were talking earlier about the importance of data and evidence. What are some creative, if I'm a mayor, I'm going back and I want an idea that I can apply to my city, what is a creative way that a mayor is using data, evidence, that you have found impressive?
Yeah, I'll just mention a few. I think about Mayor Sandy Stimpson in Mobile, Alabama, who had an undefined problem with blight and who sent his staffers out into the community with Instagram. And they used Instagram to create a comprehensive mapping of his community's blight problem that's now allowing them to target resources. I think of Eric Garcetti, who has a challenge around police recruitment. And they didn't rush in to immediately overhaul the police academy. They are doing a massive deep dive on data. They're understanding who's applying. They're understanding what kind of candidates do we actually want to stay in this process? Where are they falling out of that process? What are the pitch points? They're getting the most accurate view of sort of the different paths that different candidates go through, and that's opening all of these different interventions that they would never otherwise see.
Thank you. We're getting the hook here. So Peter has the last word, a smarter, faster thought. We were talking.
Could I have one last word about data? Because I'm going to leave some brochures for everybody. The group that I lead for the UN Secretary General put out today a report on U.S. cities for the 100 large metropolitan areas. So you'll find your cities there. And there's a handout inside that explains the website, and there are dozens of indicators for you. The idea is to track critical developments on education, health, poverty, life expectancy, and enable you to see where your cities rank in the overall national scene. So I think there's a lot of extremely valuable data, but the last moment I want to have on the microphone is to say that what we are proposing is that you adopt clear goals for, and we believe that the US should do it and every country should do it, clear goals for 2030. This is not overnight gratification, this is transformation. Clear goals on ending poverty, clear goals on decent work conditions, clear goals on decarbonizing the energy system and moving to resilient infrastructure. Set the goals. We are also ready to work with any city in this country on the metrics and the measurements of tracking the progress towards those goals. But I believe that it is a crucial part of our politics to come back to the idea not of backroom deals, but of goals for this country that are clear and bold, measurable and accountable. And that's what I'll leave some brochures for people so that they can look up the information. Thank you.
Peter Scheer, you have 15 seconds. We were talking about another paradox, and that is at a time when people hate government, mayors are popular. Why?
Because they're getting things done. So my last words are going to be thank you to Mitch LANDRIEU for bringing us all together, but mayors are on the forefront of getting things done and making it a better country. So that's my last word.
Hey!
All right, let's give him a big round of applause. Thank y'all so much. All right, that was enough homework for the night. You're getting the hook so I can get you to the music. The buses are leaving to go to Preservation Hall to hear Preservation Hall Jazz Band. So thank you, everybody. We had a great night. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Y'all have a good time at Preservation Hall. If you want to go, I think the buses are boarding, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you.
And now the company jumps when he plays reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B. A toot, a toot, a toot, a toot, he blows it 8 to the bar. In boogie rhythm, he can't blow a note unless the bass and guitar is playing with him. He makes